most common thing that I hear around the from women in around this argument when men start to talk about like what the actual odds of being attacked by a bear and so on and so forth. The most common rebuttal I get is, it's not about the statistics. You don't get it. So is it about the statistics?
So, previously, when you've had this discussion, you said that people are basing it off of emotion. I'm just kind of, based on some of the things that you said, I'm giving you factual arguments that are based in statistics. If you want to
But
talk about it like from an emotional standpoint,
well, I
or
want to
like
know what your position is, because I've heard this so many times.
on
It
Man v.
was
Bear,
never about bears and statistics and how dangerous they
if you
actually
want to
are.
know my position, so you want to know my position on like the Man v. Bear conversation, correct?
The only thing I want to know is your take on, or like, do you agree with the sentiment that it's not about statistics?
Yes, I actually don't also I don't think that using Man v. Bear as an analogy is an accurate or apt description of what happens. I think it detracts from the conversation about sexual violence and makes it into a conversation that's more abstract and palatable to people that don't want to see how relevant and um, how unserious people take it in society. I think it just makes it easier for people to digest or to either acknowledge or not acknowledge.
Moving away from statistics makes it easier to digest and acknowledge.
The Man v. Bear conversation as a whole, it's like using an analogy. I would rather just say men rape women by
I,
and
I
large.
by and large, men rape women.
Yes, men rape women. Women also rape men, but like it's a conversation that should just be had bluntly and blatantly. Like we don't
What
need
does
a
by and
bear to have
large
that
mean? Because
conversation.
to me that sounds like you're saying most men are rapists.
No.
Oh well, what did by and large mean? Or, like sometimes I just say things, and I'm like, I don't know why I said that, but like, was there
I
something
was
behind that or
speaking
not?
more rhetorically. No,
Okay,
I was speaking more
that's
rhetorically.
perfectly fine. I do that. I do that like all the time.
Um, as like it's not about the bear, it's about the fact that women are having a conversation about the fact that men cause harm to them. And rather than
Yeah.
saying men cause harm, they need to use an abstract concept like being in the forest with the bear.
Uh. Yeah. That's. I mean, that's fine. Like, do you know who? Shit. What's his name? Andrew something. Do you know the YouTube channel The Crucible?
No.
Andrew Wilson. He's been on the what's that stupid like dating podcast thing where they all sit around the table, the whatever podcast, I think. He's been on there a few times. He's very much like a anti-woman person. He says like a patriarchy is necessary and stuff like that. I think he's a total pig and a complete jackass and also an idiot, right? So I'm not I agree that when it comes to violent crime, sexual violence, whatever, that men are more guilty. The differences are vastly lower than I thought they were, but men are on the worst end of that. That mostly comes from the way overlapping bell curves plot against each other on the extremes. But I don't even disagree about that. But the thing is, the arguments I think are still sexist in the same way that arguments like against immigration are racist. Like if I said to you that, look, somebody I know was harmed by an illegal or an undocumented person, or whatever, so I think we should shut down the border and not let them in. Like, what do you think when you hear that?
That you're the average conservative, TBH. Um, I
That's
don't
okay.
believe it's
I
the
don't, just to be clear, I was not telling you what my beliefs are. I was giving you an abstraction.
You
If you
asked what I
heard
thought
that,
when I heard that. That's my thoughts.
yeah, I
I
just
would
just wanted to be clear. I'm not pro shut down the border or anything like that.
I don't know if I would say that it could be attributed to sexism though. Um,
Well, no, but I'm saying the arguments are sexist in the same way that arguments like this are racist. So
okay,
I,
can you explain to me without using an analogy, perhaps?
well, I have to because we're comparing racist arguments and sexist arguments. There's no way not to do that. So if I just say, I mean, I can just play devil's advocate and pretend to be this person. Undocumented people commit crimes, violent crimes, and fentanyl is coming across our border and whatever. Therefore, I think we should shut down the border. So, what would you say in
Okay,
response?
that's literally not how it works. Okay. Anyways,
What are you talking about?
I just I want to know if you can explain to me how the argument is sexist without making an analogy or compare like a comparison, because I said that Man v. Bear, I don't necessarily believe is accurate because it uses an analogy. So I just am having trouble with this line of like reasoning.
Um, okay, I'm going to stick to my analogy because I think it actually works very well. So, if I tell you, look, I'm just afraid of the fentanyl coming across the border. And we do know that undocumented people have killed other people in our country. I'm not even saying most of them are or anything like that, but it has happened. So I think we should shut down the border. I think that is a racist argument because it assumes that any person coming across the border is a threat. Don't you agree?
Um, sure.
Okay.
Now, how is that analogous
Because if
to
you see a man in the forest, why would you assume that he's going to kidnap or rape or whatever?
because he's a random man in the forest?
And a random immigrant coming across our border may sell fentanyl and cause somebody to overdose.
See, that's the extra leap that I'm not understanding. The whole sell
Exactly.
fentanyl and cause someone to overdose.
What?
Um,
There are like tens of thousands of fentanyl overdoses a year.
right, but how is that analogous to the conversation about Man v. Bear?
Because I'm trying to show you that when you treat people like or when you I don't know, there's
is the
probably a better way to put
fentanyl
it.
a man buying you a drink?
It can be
Is it just
literally
seems kind of
no,
like
it can be
added
anything.
on at the end to
No,
make it more emotionally charged?
no, it can be literally anything. The person coming across the border could just go and work in a field for somebody, or they could be bringing drugs across the border. We know that that happens, unfortunately.
So interestingly enough, if
And
we
a
like
man in
talk
the
about the
forest could be the love of your life or the worst dirtbag on the planet. But when you see a man in the
um,
forest and you just assume that they are the worst person in the world, that's sexist in exactly the same way that assuming somebody coming across our border, like Donald Trump said, they're bringing us rapists, murderers, and blah, blah, blah. It's sexist in the exact same way that saying that about people coming across the border is racist.
question for you. Do you think that black people can be racist?
Do you know who Jesse Lee Peterson is?
Honestly, I don't think so.
He's the guy that always calls people betas, and he's always going, amazing.
No, maybe I touch grass. I don't know. I have
Uh,
no idea who that is.
okay, well, he's black, but he's extremely racist against black people. So, yeah, black people can be racist.
Okay, so do you think that black people can be racist against white people?
Yeah, obviously.
Interesting. So that's kind of like that informs me on why your take is that like women can be
Yep,
sexist, things
just
like that.
poison the well. Obviously, they can.
I'm not poisoning the well. It
Yes,
just
you
has to
are.
do with like how you view systems of power and if you think that ist or ism is like the system of power has to be in place there.
So, do you think that men are oppressors?
Do I think that men are oppressors? I've never met oppressive men, but all the books that I've ever read tell me that men are pretty oppressive. So,
Okay,
yes.
so if a powerful woman treats a man like shit and her arguments and her justifications for it are always that because he's a man, she's sexist against she's sexist and that's oppressive.
Sure.
Okay, well then women can be sexist.
On like an interpersonal level, yeah, for sure.
Okay, well we agree. And okay. Like I find it
I
I don't know if you like when people say women can't be sexist or black people can't be racist. I think what people kind of sort of mean by that, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm just guessing. But what I think people kind of mean by that is something like the balance of power, if we look at everything in the aggregate, is leans in favor of men and leans in favor against black people. I don't even disagree with that, I guess. But that's very different from like these individual things or whatever. So
Right, right. So then, like, based off that argument, you would say that women or black people can hold prejudice, but they wouldn't be racist or sexist. I would say that having prejudice isn't necessarily a healthy thing to have. It can still be based in hate. That would be
but
the argument that most people
but if you
make.
hate people because of the color of their skin, you are you're, the type of prejudice you have is racism, is called racism. And it doesn't matter who you are or who the person you hate is either.
I mean, you just tried to explain the argumentation to me. I'm just like telling you that most people would just say that that is prejudice if they hold that view of like the way that the systems of power work and operate.
I mean, I
It's
don't
still hate.
disagree. I'm just saying that there are different types of prejudice, and racism is one of them. So,
Sure. Okay. So your whole argumentation is that Man v. Bear is sexist, but would you still say it's illogical for women to say they would rather die than be raped?
no, I can completely understand that.
So you would concede on your previous statements?
No,
What? You literally said that you think.
you can point out the contradiction if you want.
So I was asking.
Okay, so I know exactly where the screw up here happened. I agree. I don't disagree that or how do I completely bungled this. I understand the sentiment that some people have that I would rather die than go through with that. That's totally fine. However, that's not the same. Then the sexism is the leap you make where, well, over there is a man, and if I go over there, I'll be raped or killed. That's sexist in the exact same way as if I go to El Paso and I look across the Rio Grande and I see people coming across the border, I think to myself, oh, well, they're carrying guns and fentanyl and they're going to take our gerbs. It's sexist in the exact same way that that's racist.
Okay, so the previous point, saying that you don't think anyone really believes that they would rather die than be raped, based off of the previous sources that you cited and what you said in that argument. Do you concede that claim? Because I don't. I'm not fully understanding if you like are agreeing or
So I didn't
disagreeing now.
say that nobody actually believes that. If those words came out of my mouth that way,
You
then
said that you don't think anyone really believes that.
um yeah, I shouldn't have said it that way. What I think is I think I think many fewer people truly believe that. Because I don't disagree that there are people that feel that way. because people
So when
obviously commit suicide after events like that. So, yeah, if that's how I put it, then not the right way to put it.
Right. And I'm just like trying to level with you and say that there are so many more indicators that show us that it's more than just suicide that should be your metric to gauge whether someone would rather be dead than be raped, right? Like passive suicidal ideation is a thing too. Like many people engage in risk taking behaviors, hypersexuality, unprotected sex, using drugs and alcohol to excess, um, giving away all of their belongings, becoming homeless, things like that, that do put their lives at risk without actually engaging in suicide.
I'm not really sure what that had to do with the man bear thing or whatever. Can I ask you a slightly different question?
Sure.
So I don't remember. I haven't been looking at the chat very closely because I try to give the people I'm talking to my attention. But there was some stuff about rape culture or whatever. Were you bringing that up, or was that somebody else?
Yeah, it was me. I asked
Okay.
two questions. I said, you've spoken about SJWs in a very negative context on your lives, but do you believe there are positive outcomes from social justice? And then I asked, how do you think rape culture is actualized in 2024, if at all, from a social sciences standpoint?
Okay, so we'll do one and then the other. Um, I don't know if I can come up with one to compare. So, like, I consider, like, obviously, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. fought for social justice. Bernie Sanders fights for social justice. Elizabeth Warren does that kind of thing. I believe in that kind of thing, but social justice warriors are that's just a labeled, like, I don't know how closely you follow politics or whatever, but a lot of people like Alexandria Ocasio Cortez have they won't associate with the label progressive because they find it's been polluted by, for example, people that throw tomato soup on artworks to protest oil and people that super glue their hands to basketball games to scream about animal rights and stuff like that. So the label has kind of been poisoned by bad actors. So, for example, somebody who was in one of the on one of the pro-Palestine encampments on colleges, a couple months ago, I support what those people are doing. They are fighting for social justice, but the ones that are doing it in a cohesive, safe, logical, nonviolent way, I don't call them social justice warriors because it's just kind of a label that's unfortunately, because of a lot of bad actors, has been prescribed. I'm talking about a particular person who does particular things, I think, in a way that does not help the progressive side at all, and they just kind of can be bad people too. So somebody that fights for, like, you seem like a very leveled and rational and polite person. I wouldn't call you an SJW. Maybe you like I identify with
I
that
would say I'm an
cause or whatever.
SJW. I'm just not
Sure.
insane and delusional.
Yeah, and I don't think you are either. So I wouldn't call you an SJW, but I also wouldn't sit here and tell you you should call yourself something else either. It's just kind of like you got to understand what I mean when I say that.
Gotcha.
And
So
then,
the second part of that question.
yeah, I have no idea what that means. So what I would say, and this might make your head explode, I don't think the United States is a country that has rape culture.
That actually doesn't make my head explode at all. Everything that you've said to me is very much in line with someone that doesn't believe that rape culture exists, especially in the US.
Sure. So the fact that it's illegal means nothing, or it counts for very little. Because, like, a country like
Um,
Saudi
I think
Arabia,
that rape culture has much more to do with um,
right?
many different facets and things that we tolerate on a smaller level.
Sure.
Like you talking about social justice warriors online or individuals who are kind of cuckoo bananas. I think that there is something that like people refer to as like micro, meso, and macro approaches. So when we look at individuals or smaller acts, and then larger communal acts, and then like even larger like things that happen on a national level, let's say, all of these things count. So um, the rape culture at like a micro level can look like disbelief, sexual harassment, teaching boys that, oh, like let's take her out for drinks and get her like really drunk first, and then she'll be more likely to like let you go home with her. Different tactics of sexual violence that aren't necessarily denounced in our culture that need to be.
Um, sure. So let me ask. We can go into that stuff. So like in countries like Saudi Arabia, where if a woman is raped, they just call it extramarital sex and they'll execute the woman sometimes. Are you willing to say that they have rape culture?
Yeah, they do.
Okay, good. Because another weird thing that you find is sometimes people just won't criticize the rest of the world because they only want to criticize like Western
I think
worlds or
that
whatever.
rape culture and sexual violence is a global problem.
Okay, cool. Um, So, like, with regard to the United States, so it sounds like you would say that it's good that we have this is insane. It wasn't until the 1970s that we actually had like marital rape laws on the books. I think South Dakota was the first state to have one. And that didn't necessarily mean that no husband that ever did that to their wife ever got in trouble. It just wasn't on the books because there was this very old holdover idea that comes from you see it in the Bible and in holy books or whatever that, well, it's your property, so you can't be guilty of that to it, which I think is disgusting and depraved. But we now have those laws on the books. That's a good thing, right?
Sure. Can you tell me like what percentage more of like husbands that have raped their wives have gone to prison like from then till now? Like the increase, because I would say that intimate partner violence is still something that is very under prosecuted in the US, and that's part of the reason why I say rape culture still exists.
Um, I don't know what the numbers off the top of my head are. I would be surprised if we don't have. Well, funny enough, I would be surprised if the numbers were not trending downward. And what I mean by that is like positively, like the trend wasn't what we want to see. But at the same time, it may be underreported in the past. That's kind of a common phenomenon. Like something can look like it's much more prevalent because it's historically been underreported. So I don't know. I don't know the numbers. I don't know the meta analyses or whatever. So I'm not
Intimate
gonna.
partner violence is still one of the more underreported crimes. Stranger rape is going to be like the most reported form of sexual violence.
That makes
It's
sense.
statistically true, yeah.
Yeah,
There's this book. I think you should write it down. You might find it interesting. It's on Audible if you use that. It's called Credible by Deborah Turkenheimer, and it goes over like the history of the way rape is prosecuted and other forms of sexual violence. Um, it's an interesting read. Might inform your arguments a little bit better.
sure. Um, so do you think that we have made progress on this kind of thing, or do you think we are stagnant, or do you think things are getting worse?
I would say it is okay. Well, progress and stagnant can kind of coexist, right? I think that there has been progress made and things are now stagnant. Um,
So,
there is still a lot of things that need to change. Lots of rapists don't go to prison. There's lots of like statistical evidence to show that individuals who commit or are convicted of acts of sexual violence have been serial offenders by the time that they are uh, accused or like not accused, but reported. Um,
that's the case for pretty much all violent crime. Most violent crime is committed by recidivists.
right, but I don't think with grape that should be something that's the case. and there are
Well, I don't
other
think it should be
significant
for anything. So, I mean, we
that
agree, but
can
yeah.
occur, right? I think that it's not really something that's talked about a lot or enough. It's kind of viewed as like taboo or like, ooh. The way that reporting is handled, like by police, there needs to be more trauma informed detectives and officers taking report. Lots of things need to change. I think that by encouraging reporting and making a culture where it's safe to do so, and like we believe victims, is much more conducive to the like ending of sexual violence, or at least the silence surrounding it, because that is something that causes that recidivism, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I would say I think you should. I think there should be top-down approaches to it. I mean, there should be like legislation and stuff. And I mean, like employers have to do mandatory sexual harassment training and stuff. And you can say people don't take it seriously and it still happens. But I mean, obviously I think that we probably have made progress with this kind of thing. But I mean, you can't argue that we shouldn't employ those types of things. But I think real social change kind of happens from the bottom up, right? I mean, like going back to MLK, those like it was called the Million Man March, right? These were huge groups of ordinary people that got together and mobilized and organized, and that bottom up approach was extremely effective. So I guess like sort of my question would be like, what do we like? Do you think that like starting in kindergarten or something, like little boys should be told? Like, I think you need to teach people like right from wrong, obviously, but like, what do you think we should also do?
I think that consent education is necessary from a young age and up. Obviously, tuning it to what is age appropriate for whatever demographic you're teaching. I'm also a big advocate for teaching victims' rights and like the reporting process in school, not like to kindergartners, but like let's say the age that you're most likely to like endure sexual violence, like going into college, let's say 10th grade and up. That should just be something that's kind of drilled into your head. I think it takes away a lot of fear about reporting and arms people with enough knowledge to know what should and should not happen. That they are entitled to an advocate, to like have an advocate present when they see like report to the police or they are interviewed, things of that nature. But you were talking about the Million Man March. I think that's a really good point because those individual, let's say, quote unquote, million men, would be those social justice warriors uh, that you kind of shit talk. Um,
No,
I also think,
because they weren't. They didn't march to the Capitol and do what Trump's goon squad did. They marched there and were peaceful. So we went over the distinction between SJW as a label for bad actors
right,
versus
and I told
people.
you that I would consider myself an SJW. So
Yeah, that's fine.
the people that I
We
know
you and
would
I
be
just mean a
considered
different
bad.
thing when we say that, and that's fine.
Um, I also think it's really important that people who are like mandatory reporters do that job. They also like conduct themselves to a high ethical standard. So like myself, I'm a mandatory reporter. I'm also like a rape crisis advocate. Um, like if I saw some shit on Instagram that was like out of my jurisdiction, I would still do my best to reach out, report like whatever shit I saw that was off the wall. Like I saw, never mind, I shouldn't say that. I don't even know what I saw the other week, but and do my best to make sure that whoever it is either reported or gets the support that they need.
Um, so I want to ask you a question. So, uh, like all this stuff, like when I said, "What do you think we should do?" and you gave your points, I don't disagree with any of that. That all sounds fine. I you do like you do kind of worry about like to what extent it goes and like you want to make sure that it's implemented in the correct way. Like I don't want to get into this conversation, but like I don't think that you should teach boys from a young age that there's this thing called toxic masculinity and blah blah blah, because I think that can
Wait,
be
why?
extremely harmful for their development and their self-esteem. Like, I don't it's
Why? So do you think it's like just toxic masculinity in general, or the way that it's framed?
so I'm not making like a specific accusation. I'm not saying that this has happened. I'm saying that I would worry about how that would actually get talked about to them, cuz like can't you imagine that telling boys from like a really young age, if you don't do it the correct way, you're just telling them you are bad, and maybe that's not your
I
intention,
think that's
and
kind of
that's
what
not.
toxic masculinity does, though.
Well, just let me get my thing out here. That sounds so bad. Without any context, that sounds like a Harvey Weinstein thing. Um, if you like, even if you have good intentions, the message can come across that way, and I think that that can be detrimental and harmful. I think you can start to have real conversations, quote unquote real, like we know what I mean by that. At a certain age, like you said, 10th grade and above, that's where you can get into like kind of more specifics, and maybe the more like, I don't know, grown up adult themes or the more serious stuff or whatever. I just so anyways, I don't really want to get into that too much, but so I guess pretty much everything you said, I thought that sounded okay. And I just want to hear your take on this kind of thing, because I find this to be really annoying and counterproductive. Do you remember those guys that created a nail polish, and you could dip it in a drink and the nail polish would change color if it had whatever the date rape drug or whatever is in
GHB
it?
or whatever.
Sorry?
GHB or whatever.
I don't know what it's called, but do you remember that? It was a while, it was years ago, but do you remember that at all?
Vaguely, yeah. I know of it.
So, do you remember what the public response to that was?
No.
So people just were irate. They like the all you heard, and I don't know if the invention ever like went anywhere because of just such bad publicity, which to me is counterproductive. But all people said was, "How about we just teach men not to rape?" Instead of like, here.
Valid response.
No, I think that's a completely. It's
I
not
think it's also
untrue.
necessary.
I think it's
Both things have to happen. Continue,
right. So
sorry.
here's the problem with that. When it's not untrue that we should teach. I may use a double negative here and then confuse my message, but we absolutely should teach people that that's wrong, right? But when somebody's trying to do something about an actually occurring problem, and it just gets shouted down with, well, why don't you actually do blah blah blah, that would take generations to see the effects, because any kind of process like that takes a lot of time. What about the really occurring thing that we have going on right now? This would be helpful to that, and instead it just kind of gets shouted down. I can't stand when I see stuff like that, because it's so, like, I find it to be like counterproductive or whatever. And I'm just wondering like what your sentiment is.
I think that both approaches are necessary. So I wouldn't like shout down testing nail polish, but I would also say it's necessary. So what you said about teaching men not to like grape is part of um, like a counter argument to grape culture. It has to do with women being taught not to get graped, right? Which is part of the reason why people were so irate over the nail polish. But realistically, both approaches are necessary. Um, and it's not just like not, it's not, Jesus Christ. It's not just about teaching men not to grape, right? It's about teaching men consent and those tactics of sexual violence that I talked about before. There's a whole list done by the CDC based on like statistical evidence that you can like read if you're interested. Um, but like it's about teaching them that those things are not ways to get with a woman or like it's not so cool that she slept with you after you got her really drunk, or that like you lied about who you were to sleep with her. Things like that also play a factor, and we should be teaching people that that's wrong, not putting it in TV shows and making people like make it look cool. That's also like another part of grave culture.
Yeah, I don't even really disagree, I guess, with most. Are you Canadian?
Yes.
Okay. When you said about, I could tell. Um um I don't know. I've kind of run out of things to talk about, I guess, but we did like 45 minutes.
Cool. So
Sounds
you
like
can
we agree
consider
on way more than we disagree though.